I was different from other children since I was little, I could see the ghosts of the dead. But my father didn't believe me, he said I was a chronic liar. Only my mother in the family always believed me and would comfort me. But this time, my father died, and I did not see his ghost. After I told my mother about it, she fell into thought. Then, despite my grandmother's suggestion to bury him, my mother insisted on having my father cremated. Only after that was I finally able to see my father's ghost. At 7, I didn't find death frightening. Because whenever I wanted to, I could see their ghosts. Dad didn't like me talking about it, he said there were no ghosts in this world. He thought the things I described were just a child's imagination, and later he even called me a liar. I thought Dad was awful, he didn't believe me. But Mom always trusted me. When the breakfast shop downstairs lost their son, it was I who saw his ghost. That's how I learned he had been killed and buried under a tree. Tim's grandmother downstairs died, but they couldn't find the bank book she had left behind. It was I who asked Tim's grandmother's ghost and then told them where it was. But Mom always forbade me from telling anyone that I could see ghosts. Those few times before, it was Mom who secretly wrote little notes and left them along their usual routes, and only then did they find out. They never thought I was involved, they just assumed one of their family members had manifested a spirit. In a way that wasn't wrong, their family did indeed manifest a spirit, only they themselves couldn't see it. But this time, my father was lying there motionless and Grandma said he was already dead. So why couldn't I see Father's ghost? I searched everywhere for my father's figure, but never found him. Suddenly there was a sharp slap. I looked up and saw my grandmother had given my mother a vicious blow. "You jinx, you must have pissed my son off, that's why he couldn't take it and killed himself. Damn it, what sin did I commit to end up with a daughter-in-law like you? Poor son, so young, just gone like that. When Vincent wanted to marry you I was opposed from the start, someone your age brings doom to their parents, and now you've gone and cursed my son to death too." My mother explained, "A few debt collectors came yesterday and said Vincent owes them money. If he doesn't pay today they'll make Vincent pay." Vincent must have been so upset about that he couldn't take it. "Mom, let's hurry and take Vincent to the hospital. Maybe he can still be saved." My mother tried to go forward to see my father, but Grandma stopped her. "He's already cold, what hospital are you talking about? It would be a waste of money. You know my son was upset because people were after him for debt, why don't you keep an eye on him properly? If you keep watching him all the time, will he still find a chance to kill himself? Cry, 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 what else can you do besides cry? Useless thing that couldn't even bear a son. If it weren't for your bad luck, how would my son have owed money to anyone? You bring me bad luck just by being here. Go on, hurry up and make me dinner. Once I'm full I'll take my son back to his hometown to bury him." My mom tried to speak, but my grandmother's hand came down toward my face. Although I turned aside and avoided it, I still got hit a little. I had already grown used to this kind of beating and scolding, and I had become more and more skilled at dodging. I couldn't completely avoid it yet because I was still young. Once I grew a little older, I would surely be able to get away. But Mom still felt so sorry for me, she took me by the hand and led me into the kitchen. She held me tightly and said, "Nancy, don't be afraid. Mommy will protect you." I said, "Mom, it's so strange. Why can't I see Dad's ghost? You know, I can see any spirit that's been dead less than 3 months." My mother's expression faltered. "Maybe you're too upset to look properly. I'm not the least bit sad that Dad died. He was a bad father, he hit you and let Grandma bully you. He still insisted you go out with those uncles we don't know. I know Mom didn't want to. Mom often hides under the quilt and cries. Mom isn't happy at all. It's all my fault. If I hadn't fallen when Mom tried to run away with me last time, we might have gotten away. I've kept thinking it'd be better if I weren't here, so Mom could run away. But now our chance has come. Dad is dead, even if we don't run away, we won't get beaten anymore. Mom won't be forced to do things she doesn't like. But Mom, do you think maybe Dad isn't really dead? Otherwise why can't I see his ghost? I rattled off like beans pouring from a bamboo tube, chattering without stop. After hearing me, Mom's expression suddenly grew grave. She looked toward where Dad was and seemed lost in thought. Mom said to me, "Nancy, I need to be sure about something. Stay hidden here and don't move, okay?" I nodded and said, "Don't worry, Mom. I'll sit tight and not move." Then Mom suddenly went mad and rushed at Dad. She turned her face sideways and pressed her ear against his chest. Mom cried out, "Vincent, how can you be so cruel? You leave the two of us alone, and all this debt, how do you expect us to live?" Mom kept pounding on Dad's body. Grandma tried to come over and pull her away. But she wasn't as strong as Mom. If it weren't for Dad aiding the villain and holding Mom back with me, Mom could have beaten Grandma. Maybe it was my imagination, but I thought the muscles on Dad's face were twitching, making him look a little sinister. It was at that moment that I saw a long missing light return to my mother's eyes. Grandma and my mother were still bickering when a bunch of fierce-looking men suddenly burst into the room, each of them carrying long sticks. Leading them was a young man with yellow hair and a sleeve of bright, garish tattoos. He strode in and bellowed, "Get Vincent out here to pay his debts." Grandma, who had been shouting at my mother with plenty of force just moments before, now cowered like a quail. My mother said, "Vincent is dead. Look, he's right here, he's already gone." Mike said, "Bad luck, but a man's death doesn't erase his debts. You're his wife, so if he dies you pay for him. The money he borrowed from me all had IOUs, even if you take it to court, he still owes me. But the money he borrowed was never given to me, he didn't even give me living expenses. I don't know where his money went." My mother looked gaunt and malnourished, her words were very convincing. But that didn't make Mike relent. After much pleading, my mother finally got Mike to agree to come back in a week, to give us time to arrange the funeral. After the debt collectors left, my grandmother started trembling again. "I'm telling you, you'll have to pay all that money yourself." "I don't have any money. Mom, Vincent's factory is doing badly, it's insolvent. The house has already been mortgaged, and he took all the savings to cover the holes. How am I supposed to pay?" "That's because you jinxed it. Anyway, I don't care, if you can't pay, you'll go to prison. And mark my words, I won't take care of Nancy." Seeing how stubborn my grandmother was, my mother stopped arguing and said, "Mom, let's take Vincent to the hospital." Grandmother said, "I've already checked him, there's no breath, he's beyond saving. Besides, where on earth would we get the money to treat him?" "Mom, but I've heard that some people show signs of apparent death or shock. If they try to resuscitate, there's still a chance of survival. Isn't it often in the news that someone in the morgue suddenly comes back to life?" Hearing my mother's words, a flicker of discomfort crossed grandmother's face. Still she insisted, "My son drank paraquat. That stuff, don't talk about doctors, even a god couldn't bring him back." My mother murmured, "But if we don't go to the hospital, where do we get a death certificate?" "Without a death certificate, I can't assume Vincent's debts, Vincent is still the primary debtor." "Mom, I understand now. You did it for my sake, was that your intention? What a brilliant idea. You take Vincent back to the hometown to bury him. When the debt collectors come, I'll tell them Vincent is faking his death and that he has already run off, so they should go after Vincent for the money. After all, I have no money, and Vincent is still alive. No matter how they pressure me, it won't work. So they'll have to keep chasing Vincent for the debts. That way we're safe." "Mom, I've misunderstood you all these years. I always thought you were a wicked mother-in-law, but it turns out you're a thoughtful person who's always looked out for me." Saying that, Mom grabbed Grandma's hand and started sobbing. Her words put Grandma on the defensive, leaving her momentarily at a loss for how to respond. She kept glancing toward Dad, but he remained motionless and couldn't give her an answer. But soon Grandma pushed Mom away. She said she needed to use the restroom, then took her phone and went into the bathroom. The faucet in the bathroom kept running without stop. By the time Grandma came out again, she was wearing that same look of smug certainty. "Clara, I heard that if someone dies at home, the neighborhood committee can issue a death certificate. You don't necessarily have to go to a hospital. I happen to know someone who works at the neighborhood office. She said she can help and get the certificate issued directly. Mom said, but I heard that only when someone dies of natural causes can the neighborhood issue a certificate. Vincent killed himself, surely the police have to issue a certificate in a case like that. Grandma said, why are you always so narrow-minded? If we don't say it was suicide, who would know? Having someone who knows people makes things easier. She already said she can get it done, so just wait. Before long, an auntie came and brought my father's death certificate. I knew that auntie. My father told me to call her Aunt Sylvia. I had seen her and my father come out of rooms in a disheveled state several times. But my father forbade me to tell my mother. Of course I didn't obey my father, but I found that when I told my mother about it, she only became more miserable. My mother would argue with my father, and he would hit her. So after that, I stopped telling her. Sylvia said a few words of condolence to my mother, then left. She didn't look the least bit sad. My mother said she needed the death certificate to deal with the debts and proposed to keep it herself. Grandma objected, but my mother said that if they didn't handle it, the debts would remain tied to Dad. So Grandma finally gave in. My mother told Grandma she had already arranged a van and would leave first thing tomorrow morning. The van would take Dad and Grandma back to the hometown. My mother also said she wanted to go back with them, but Grandma refused. Grandma said that in the old village's custom only men could attend a burial. It would be useless for my mother and me to return, so we should just stay here. My mother agreed to Grandma's demand with a heavy heart. That night my mother cooked a lot of dishes, all made from the meat Grandma had previously dug out of the trash. Grandma never ate those things herself, she only let my mother and me eat them. She always ate the meat she bought separately for herself. My mother was afraid the meat would make us sick, so she never let me eat it. She would wait until Grandma wasn't looking and, now and then, throw those portions away. The household allowance was all in Grandma's hands. Mom had almost no money, so we could only go to the market and buy the cheap scraps people had passed over. But Mom said those cuts were far cleaner and more hygienic than the ones Grandma pulled out of the trash. That day, however, Mom secretly cooked the meat Grandma had scavenged and fed it to her, lying that it was something Grandma had bought earlier. Grandma never expected Mom would dare to trick her, so she ate it with delight. As she ate she complained, they put too much salt and chili in this meat, you can't taste the meat itself. Be more careful when you cook from now on. I knew my mother had done it on purpose, otherwise Grandma would have noticed the meat tasted wrong the moment she took the first bite. Grandma wouldn't let me eat from that plate, so it suited us, we wouldn't dare to eat it either. That night, Grandma's wailing started. At first she would go to the bathroom every 10 minutes, later, she couldn't come out of it at all. My mother hurried Grandma to the hospital. The doctor said Grandma had food poisoning from eating something with dangerously high levels of E. coli. Grandma was left in the hospital for treatment, and my mother, saying she was going home to get a change of clothes, took me away. When we got home, the van my mother had arranged to take Dad and Grandma back to our hometown arrived. My mother had people lift Dad onto the vehicle. I asked my mother, "Isn't Grandma hospitalized? She can't take Dad back to the hometown now. Is it just the two of us taking Dad back?" My mother smiled at me and said, "We're taking your father, but not back to the hometown, we're sending him on his way." Isn't sending Dad off on his final journey the same as sending him back to his hometown? My mother didn't answer, she just stroked my head and said, "Nancy, Mom won't let anyone bully you anymore." My mother and I rode in that car to the crematorium. She paid extra to schedule Dad as the first to be cremated. That death certificate Sylvia brought was useful, without it, the crematorium wouldn't have agreed to cremate him. My mother seemed very uneasy, as if she feared something might go wrong. She kept checking her watch. She kept asking me whether I had seen Dad's ghost. To put her at ease, I looked everywhere. After searching for a long time, I finally saw Dad's spirit. When my mother heard the news, she let out a long sigh. I said, "Mom, Dad is cursing you. He says you killed him." But wasn't he clearly dead by suicide? What else did your father say? Wait, can your father hear us talking? I said, he could at first, but now Dad has been pulled away by other ghosts. Mom asked me, can you command other ghosts? I said, no, he barged into them. He ran straight into other ghosts. They're attacking him, he won't get through them for a while. Mom said, you scared me, I thought you could control ghosts. I smiled innocently, looking every bit like a naive child. Mom would never suspect I was lying to her. I kept up the act, not wanting Mom to discover how terrifying I could be. Mom asked, what did your dad just say? Dad said you're a stupid woman. He could have used his fake death to leave the debts to you and run off with that Sylvia. But now you've ruined everything. Mom wore an expression that said, I knew it. I asked Mom, you knew all along that Dad was faking his death and wanted us to pay his debts? My mother hesitated for a moment, looking at me as if she wanted to say something but held back. I said, Mom, I'm not a child anymore. Don't keep everything from me, I can help carry the burden. My words gave her confidence, so she continued, I didn't know at first, but your grandmother's behavior was too abnormal. She treats her son like a treasure, yet she wouldn't even send him to the hospital and immediately declared him dead, and she insisted on a burial. That's just not logical. Especially after you said you didn't see your father's ghost, I felt even more that something was wrong. When I pretended to be grieving and threw myself on your father's body, I watched closely. Although he couldn't move, there was still a faint heartbeat. He must have been given a full-body anesthetic. Nancy, even though your father is dead, your grandmother certainly won't let this go quietly. Your father still has debts unsettled on his side. If he wants to fake his death, his money certainly won't just disappear into thin air. I have to find a way to track it down. Right now you should pretend you can't see your father, and then follow your mother's instructions. Can you secretly tell me what your father says and does? I promised loudly, yes, Mom. After Dad, bruised and battered, was released, Mom and I carried his ashes out of the crematorium and went to the hospital together. The reason we were waiting was because I was afraid my dad, as a ghost on his own, might wander off to the wrong place. If he were to simply vanish into thin air, it would be a big mess. When we arrived at the hospital, Grandma was asleep. According to a grandmother in the bed next to hers, my grandma had woken up earlier, realized my mother and I weren't there, and cursed like a maniac for half an hour. Later my grandma said she wanted to buy something to eat and was stopped by the doctor, so she cursed the doctor for another half hour, and now she had just fallen asleep. This is your mother-in-law, right? I see her lively as ever, doesn't look sick at all. Mom said, my mother-in-law has always been full of energy. She's been pulling through the whole night, there's nothing left in her stomach, I'll go out and buy her some plain porridge. If she wakes up, please tell her for me. My mom placed the box containing Dad's ashes on the cabinet beside Grandma's sickbed, then left with me. Mom took me to a large restaurant and ordered a lot of delicious food. I hadn't eaten so many good things in a long time. Swallowing, I asked Mom, isn't this too expensive? Do we have the money? Mom said, Nancy, eat up, if we can always have meals this hearty, it'll be worth it. By the time we finished eating and returned to the hospital, it was already more than 2 hours later. Grandma had woken up. When she saw us come in, she grabbed a cup and hurled it at my mother. But Mom had been expecting it and dodged in time. She shouted, did you poison my food? Otherwise how would I have food poisoning, while you two are fine? Do you think that because my son is gone I'm an easy mark? After saying that she began to wail. Because of Grandma's performance, people in the ward had already started whispering and pointing at me and my mother. I had a sudden idea, rushed over and hugged Grandma, saying, Grandma, how can you talk about me and Mom like that? You're sick, and we're upset too. It's a shame the only meat in the house is for you and Dad. You won't let Mom and me have any, otherwise I'd gladly share the hardship and sit with you. When Grandma saw her complaining had failed and the murmurs had turned against her, she hurried to change the subject. She said to Mom, don't dawdle, get the discharge papers ready, I still have to take my son home. Let's go right now, not a moment to lose. As the old saying goes, fallen leaves return to the root. My son is drifting all alone, and the thought of it breaks my heart. I watched my father's ghost lying by Grandma's bedside and thought, my dad isn't lonely at all, he's been keeping you company this whole time. But what exactly had just happened? Why did Dad's ghost look so sorrowful? So sorrowful he didn't even come to bother Mom. Of course, he wasn't really capable of causing anyone trouble anymore. Mom said, driving back to our hometown from here would take over 10 hours, I couldn't bear to have you endure such a long trip. So I've already had Vincent's body cremated. When the time comes you can take the urn and just fly out. Although Vincent is gone and left behind a huge debt, for the sake of your health I absolutely refuse to skimp on this money. My grandmother asked in disbelief, what did you say? What happened to Vincent? My mother repeated, I said your son has turned to ashes. There's no need to go through the trouble of sending him back to the hometown. I've already packed the ashes, you just take them and go. To avoid making people uncomfortable on the plane, I even disguised the urn a bit. Where's the urn I put here? Grandma shouted, you damned fool, why didn't you listen to me? I told you to bring him back and bury him in the hometown, so why did you go and act on your own? My son wasn't dead at all, you killed my son, you owe my son. My mother said, Mom, what are you talking about? Vincent committed suicide, remember? It was you who arranged the death certificate. Even the crematorium accepted that death certificate. At that moment my father was finally provoked by the outside voices. He cried, I was only pretending to be dead, you idiot. If you had just quietly paid off my debts for me, wouldn't that have been fine? Why did you have to act on your own, Wah. I haven't even seen my son born yet, I didn't even get a chance to tell Sylvia where I hid my money. You fool, you didn't just kill me, you even had my mother drink my ashes. What? Drink ashes? I followed my father's pointing finger and, sure enough, saw the box that contained his ashes. I pointed at the box beside Grandma's pillow and said to Mom, Mom, I found Dad's urn. It turns out Grandma knew the urn was here, so she put it by the pillow to remember Dad properly. I walked over and picked up the urn and said, but why is the outside so dirty, like something spilled out of it? The old woman in the neighboring bed said, your grandma just said she was weak and made a cup of that protein powder to drink. So it wasn't protein powder in there after all, it was your father's ashes? My conversation with that old woman distracted my grandma from cursing at my mom. She looked at the box I was holding and said, what urn? Isn't that the container for protein powder? My mom said, it's not that I was worried you'd have trouble taking an urn on the plane, I specially disguised it. See, if I hadn't told you, wouldn't you have thought this was a health supplement? But Mom, did you really drink Vincent's ashes? How could you do that? That's your own son. My mother burst into loud sobs after saying that, but I knew it was all an act. I told her how earlier she had deliberately gone to buy a box of protein powder and even poured the powder out to give to the shop assistant. So Mom had planned this long ago, she really is something. I can't hold my mother back either, I have to become more useful and bring her more information. When Grandma learned that her son was dead, and that she had even drunk his ashes, she was so furious that she fainted. Fortunately she was already in the hospital and the doctors arrived quickly. They said Grandma had a cerebral hemorrhage and needed immediate surgery. My mother sobbed uncontrollably again, but doctor, my husband just died, and he left behind so many debts still unpaid. Earlier my mother-in-law was hospitalized with food poisoning and I've already spent every last bit of the family's savings. I really don't have any money now. The doctor said awkwardly, in a case like this, surgery can't guarantee a return to the patient's previous state of health. But if we don't operate, the patient is very likely to be left permanently paralyzed or even die. My father's ghost was shouting, you idiot, didn't you stash away any savings all these years? How can you not even pull together money for medical treatment? Mom, wake up, tell them you have hidden savings, that's the money that can save your life. The $1 million I left you is enough for your treatment. Mom, wake up, even if you can only say one word. Inspired by my father, I immediately pressed my ear to Grandma's mouth, then said to my mother, "Mom, I just heard Grandma speak." Grandma said she had secret savings, but she hadn't said where they were before she fainted again. "All of Grandma's things are at home, let's go back and look," the doctor said puzzledly. The patient spoke. "That shouldn't happen, she should still be in an altered state of consciousness." When my mother heard me say that, she realized I had gotten the information from my father. So she said, "It must be my husband who just died watching over us," making my mother-in-law reveal the crucial information. "Doctor, we're going home to fetch the money now, we'll be right back." Having said that, Mom took me and left the hospital to go home. Dad didn't come with us, he stayed behind at the hospital. We went home and started rifling through Grandma's things. Since Grandma had planned not to come back after sending Dad off to the old home, her money must be hidden among the luggage she intended to take. Having a target made it easier. Later we found a bank book tucked between several layers of clothing, someone had even handwritten 6 digits on it. I knew immediately that had to be the passcode. I had heard Grandma say before that Mrs. Wang downstairs actually used her own birthday as a password, not secure at all. But Grandma had gone and written the password right on the bank book. She was even worse than Mrs. Wang. I opened the bank book and counted the zeros, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, there were 6 zeros. I asked Mom, "How much is this?" Mom said, "This is $1 million US. I opened my eyes wide, so Grandma was that rich. After Mom got the bank book, she contacted the creditors and used all that money to pay off the debts. "Mom, aren't we going to save Grandma?" Mom said, "Whether we save her or not depends on how sincere your father's heart is. Those funds he transferred, until the foreign debts are fully covered, I won't compromise for a single day." "Nancy, do you think Mom is heartless?" I said, "No, if we don't do this, we'll have to help Dad pay off his debts." I heard him, he secretly hid the money. He's going to run off with that Sylvia to live somewhere else, leaving you alone to pay the debts. Mom will suffer terribly, maybe even lose her life. Dad and Grandma aren't leaving us a way out, why should we care about them? When Mom heard me, she patted my head with relief. I was glad to learn she had a plan and knew what she was doing. It made me proud that my efforts had helped her pave the way to this point. After the debts were settled, we returned to the hospital. Before entering the ward, Mom asked if I'd seen Dad's ghost. Only after I confirmed that I had did we go in. Grandmother woke up after treatment, but her mouth and eyes were crooked, and she kept drooling. As soon as Mom came in, she threw herself on Grandmother, shouting that she was useless. "Ma, I found your secret savings. I meant to use that money to save you." But as soon as I left the house I was stopped by the loan sharks. They snatched the money, said it was interest. They also said that until the debt was paid off they wouldn't let me use any money for the operation. What are we going to do? Hearing this, Dad was pacing anxiously at the side. "I have money. I converted it all into gold and hid it. Why don't you go look for it?" I listened to Dad's rambling words and paced anxiously. "Just tell me where the money is, or where are we supposed to look?" He's an adult, and he still hid the money in a place only he knew, with no sense of risk. If I couldn't see his ghost, he would have left behind a pile of debts for no reason, and that money would have gone unspent by anyone. Then again, if I couldn't see ghosts and hadn't discovered Dad faking his death, he would by now have run off with that Sylvia. Mom had the doctor prescribe some medicine, then arranged for Grandma to be discharged. Grandma can only move one hand now and her speech is slurred. But even so, that hasn't stopped her from chattering non-stop. I couldn't hear exactly what she was saying, but from her tone it definitely wasn't anything good. Grandma was slumped on the bed, unable to control her bowels, the room reeking. My dad couldn't smell it, but just looking at the scene made it clear there was an odor. Every day my mom only fed Grandma plain congee and pickles. When asked, she said there was no money, couldn't afford anything else. But my mom and I always sneaked out to eat delicious food. 2 days later, Sylvia showed up at our house. Sylvia must have had prior arrangements with my dad, but she hadn't been able to reach him for the past few days, she couldn't even get through to Grandma's phone. Naturally, she was worried. So she had no choice but to go there in person to see what was really going on. My mother asked politely, "Is there something you need?" Sylvia said, "I haven't been able to reach Aunt Helen for a while and I'm a bit worried, so I came to check." My mother said, "You know, my husband just passed away." My mother-in-law couldn't take the shock. She had a sudden cerebral hemorrhage and is now paralyzed in bed. "Do you want to go in and see her?" But my mother-in-law now eats, drinks, pees and poops in bed, so the house smells pretty foul. Sylvia was stunned by the news that my grandmother had gone limp, but she quickly thought of a more pressing question. Aunt Helen couldn't move, what about Vincent's corpse then? My mother said, "What else can we do?" "Cremate him. It's the middle of summer, if we don't cremate him, the whole house will start to stink." Sylvia cried out in terror, "How could you cremate someone who's still alive?" My mother said, "You're hilarious, you're saying the exact same thing my mother-in-law said. Of course you can't cremate a living person, that's murder, the crematorium wouldn't agree to it either. But Vincent is already dead, and it was you who issued the death certificate. If you ask me, I should be thanking you. If you hadn't helped, I really wouldn't have known what to do with Vincent's body. You say my mother-in-law is like this, but we couldn't bring him back to his hometown, could we? But why do you and my mother-in-law both say Vincent didn't die? You issued the death certificate, could there be something fishy? Did you deliberately forge the certificate and cause Vincent's death?" That accusation was such a big hat to place on Sylvia's head she was left speechless. Without a death certificate, she could have claimed the whole thing was a prank. Even if my mother's actions didn't quite amount to murder, they would at least be manslaughter. But since there was a death certificate, my father must have been dead before the cremation. If this blew up, the graver charge would fall on Sylvia for abusing her position for personal gain. At worst, it could even be murder. As she spoke, my mother led Sylvia into my grandmother's room. Sylvia still looked dazed and hadn't noticed the stench in the house. My grandmother was extremely agitated when she saw Sylvia. She kept staring at Sylvia's belly. "Dad said he was going to have a son, apparently that child is already in Sylvia's belly. Look at Sylvia's stomach, it's not showing at all. How could they be so sure the baby she's carrying is definitely a boy?" Sylvia said to Mom, "Can Aunt Helen and I have a few words alone?" Mom said, "Of course. I'll go out and not bother you." Before she left, Mom even closed the door behind her. Inside the room were the two of them and a ghost, who knows what they talked about. But whatever my grandmother said no one could understand, and whatever my father said no one could hear. Sylvia went to look for my granny, surely intending to press her about where Dad had hidden the money, but my granny really didn't know. Half an hour later, Sylvia, in a panic, tried to get out of the room. Then she pulled the doorknob right off. The door was broken, and Sylvia was trapped inside. After spending half an hour in my granny's room, even the slowest of realizations would make Sylvia sense something was wrong. She pounded on the door like mad. "Clara, can you unlock it from the outside and let me out?" Mom said, "Oh dear, that doorknob outside, I've already pulled it off earlier. I'll go out now and find a locksmith, hang on a little longer." Sylvia had no choice but to stay in that foul-smelling room and wait for rescue, and she waited for 6 hours. During that time, Sylvia endured the stench from outside, her own hunger, and the pressure from a full bladder. Sylvia said, "Can someone break the door open? I really need to use the bathroom." I said, "Aunt Sylvia, Mom's out, it's just me at home, I can't break this door. In Grandma's room there are adult diapers, why don't you put one on? They're really convenient." "Aunt Sylvia, are you hungry? There's protein powder in my grandmother's room. If you're hungry, mix some up and drink it. I see Grandma drinks it a lot, and after she does she says she's not hungry anymore." 6 hours later, my mother returned with the locksmith, and Sylvia was finally released. The smell in the house had grown stronger. It wasn't just my grandmother's doing, Sylvia had added her share. Sylvia's face flushed, but she still forced herself to tell my mother. "Aunt Helen said he's worried Victor's spirit won't rest. She wanted me to find someone to perform a ritual for him." To perform the ritual we need Victor's ashes. Where are his ashes? I need to borrow them for a few days. My grandmother now can only babble, the excuse she came up with is really flimsy. But we didn't expose her. I said to her, Dad's ashes are placed by Grandma's bedside. I pointed at the protein powder container and said to Sylvia, this is it. Huh, how come this lid has been opened? There's some ashes missing inside. Sylvia stared where I was pointing and couldn't speak. You trembled and asked, isn't that protein powder? I took the real protein powder out of the lower drawer. I said, this is the actual protein powder, the one at Grandma's bedside is Dad's ashes. Ah? I just told you it's okay to drink the protein powder, you wouldn't drink Dad's ashes, would you? Why are you like Grandma, liking to drink Dad's ashes? Do you think it tastes better? At my words, Sylvia gagged and ran out. Mom said to me, that was an improvised bit outside the script, wasn't it? You really are a little rascal. With that she grabbed Dad's urn and chased after her. I was pleased to have teased Sylvia. But Dad's ghost was clearly not pleased. His ashes had just been treated like a health tonic by the two people he cared about most and swallowed down, that had to feel awful. He brooded for a long time, then suddenly lunged at me. In truth he couldn't touch me at all, his action was only a way to vent the anger inside him. But this time felt different. I picked up a peachwood sword and thrust it through his chest. Although he had no physical body, after that stroke his spirit began to dissipate. He asked in shock, you can see me? Dad, I've told you long ago that I can see ghosts, you're the one who didn't believe me. If you'd believed sooner, you wouldn't have faked your death, it was far too easy to see through. My father asked, unwilling to accept it, you could see me long ago, so why are you acting against me only now? I said, because I wanted to know where you hid the money. I'm acting now because I already know. You buried those gold bars under the tree where Sylvia met him for the first time. I don't know which tree it is, but Sylvia does. Didn't you notice? Just now Sylvia was on her phone the whole time, that's because she was messaging the shaman we found for my mother. That charlatan told Sylvia that as long as he could get your ashes, he could perform a ritual at the place where you first met and call your spirit back. That way Sylvia could ask you in person where you hid the money. Do you think earlier when Mom chased after Sylvia, she went off for no reason? Thanks to Sylvia's good memory, Mom has already found those gold bars. There were quite a lot of them. After paying off the debts, what was left is enough for Mom and me to live comfortably for the rest of our lives. Not bad for the retirement funds you set aside for yourself and Sylvia. My father, you truly are a beast. You threatened your wife with your own daughter, forcing her to seduce other men while you reaped the rewards. I've wanted you dead for a long time. Back then I was too young and my abilities were limited. But I kept training, and at last I grew strong. Do you know how the idea of faking your death came to be? I planted a ghost in your dreams and fed you the idea. Luckily you're shameless enough, otherwise my plan couldn't have worked. Go in peace, my father. When my father's soul finally vanished for good, it was exactly at the moment my mother came through the door. Everything about it was so perfectly timed. We didn't get to redeem the apartment we lived in. It held too many memories we didn't want to remember, so we bought a new place and moved out. Of course we didn't take Grandma with us. Mom sent her to a nursing home, the cheapest kind. I heard the caregivers there beat and scold the elders. I hope Grandma can find some peace in her remaining days. My mother, however, declared that she would do everything to keep me alive and well for a long time. Even the slightest ailment Grandma had would be treated at great expense. As for Sylvia, I heard that once she realized there was nothing to gain, she hurriedly aborted the child. My mother and I, of course, were going to live happily ever after.